What do you think of Paul?
I thought Paul's was rubbish, you know. I think he'd make a better one when he's frightened into it.
First off, the Beatles did not invent the diss track. Some would argue that the first diss track was the 18th century British-American Yankee Doodle, written by loyalist colonist against patriot colonist. Then there's the reggae musician Lee Scratch Perry, who had a penchant for writing songs insulting former collaborators. Not to mention, the term diss track is firmly rooted in hip-hop culture, and if we were to apply the most accurate cultural definition, the credit and proliferation of not only the term, but the practice itself should be attributed almost wholly to hip-hop artists. But before you come at me, the Beatles did undoubtedly bring the diss track into the forefront of modern popular culture. The feud surrounding the Beatles' breakup, and more specifically, the vitriol between John and Paul, was a media sensation, spurred on not only by their statements in the media, but by the music they produce. While not the topic of this video, it could be argued the Beatles' first diss track was the 1968 Sexy Sadie, written by John Lennon. This fantastic song was written in the fallout of the Beatles' time in Rishikesh, India, where they had studied transcendental meditation under the famed guru, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. What was this fallout, you may ask? Well, it's a very complex story, but the gist is this. While the Beatles were studying at the Maharishi's ashram, rumors began to circulate that the Maharishi, a man proclaimed to be celibate, was engaging in sexual relations with a woman at the camp, as well as potentially fondling Mia Farrow, who was also studying there at the time. Now, there's a lot of debate surrounding this incident, in large part due to the fact that the rumor was perpetuated by a man with ulterior motives. Let's not get into all of that, though. John Lennon, who had put complete faith in the Maharishi, was incredibly hurt and enraged by these rumors. He left the ashram on bad terms, and being the talent he was, immediately set to writing about it. Sexy Sadie, what have you done? You made a fool out of everyone. Replace Sexy Sadie with Maharishi, and you have the original draft of the song. Now, George Harrison would actually follow this up with a diss track of his own, the excellent Not Guilty, which never ended up as a Beatles release. George, despite the fiasco in India, was still very attached to the culture. He felt dismissed by the other Beatles, and that he was being unfairly blamed for the whole ordeal. Not guilty for looking like a freak, making friends with every Sikh. Not guilty for leading you astray on the road to Mandalay. It's a great track, but the songs we will be focusing on today were written 3 years later, after the Beatles broke up. In 1970, John and Paul were amongst the most famous people in the world, even outside of the context of the Beatles. When these collaborators and best friends turned into bitter rivals, it was a public spectacle. John in particular had no issues airing out his and Paul's dirty laundry to the media.
Paul thought he was the fucking Beatles, and he never fucking was, you know.
Just months earlier, as far as the world knew, the Beatles were together. There were rumors, of course, but this sudden heel turn was a shock. Their resentments toward each other had been building for some time. Paul was very bitter about Yoko's role in John's life, specifically the manner in which she affected what had always drawn Paul and John so close together, their music, their collaboration. And John, in turn, was incredibly hurt at Paul's failure to accept Yoko, which, to be fair, anyone would have struggled with. John didn't just say, "Here's Yoko, I love her." It wasn't just that he insisted she attend every recording session, but John truly wanted Yoko to be a creative collaborator, not only with himself, but with the Beatles too. He would have loved taking her on as the fifth Beatle. But obviously, none of the others wanted this at all. This weird three-way tension became a four-way when Paul struck up a relationship with Linda Eastman. When she and Paul married in 1969, John and Yoko immediately set to marrying as well, beginning the endeavor just days after Paul and Linda. I'm sure these two events were totally unrelated. Then came the business issues. In the wake of their former band manager Brian Epstein's death, the Beatles struggled to fill that role, and as a result, their finances and business affairs began to fall into ruin. Enter Alan Klein, a savvy and talented businessman, and also a crook. John loved Alan Klein.
He's a fucking sharp man, you know. And anybody that knew me that well, without ever having meeting me, had to be a guy that I could look after. He knew how to handle me, to look after me, you know.
Paul did not. He rightfully was distrustful of him and wanted his now father and brother-in-law, John and Lee Eastman, to manage the band. The others didn't agree and felt Paul was trying to seize even more control over the band. After innumerable arguments and disagreements, Alan Klein and the other Beatles won out. He was declared band manager and business manager. Not long after, though, John informed them all that he was quitting the band. Klein and the Beatles, waging a number of legal battles against both their label and music publisher, asked John to keep hush-hush about this, which he did. Well, Paul, after he was told to delay his debut solo album so as not to affect the sales of the upcoming Let It Be LP, bitterly declared to the public that he was quitting the Beatles. The superstar equivalent of saying, "You're not breaking up with me, I'm breaking up with you." Suffice to say, this made John even angrier. Not long after that, Paul, wanting to sever all legal ties with the Beatles, and Alan Klein sued them in court, arguing that the Beatles were dead, and that he should be allowed to leave the business. This time, Paul won. Phew, that's a lot, I know. But what this brings us to is Paul's 1971 release, Ram. And the track that opened this album was titled Too Many People. It's a song littered with barbs against both John and Yoko. Too Many People Going Underground is a clear shot at Yoko and her avant-garde music and art. Too Many People Preaching Practices. This is an obvious reference to John and Yoko's public crusade at this point, as they relentlessly engaged in well-meaning, but also fairly performative, displays of political activism. Then there's the line that potentially angered John the most, which makes up the choruses. That was your first mistake. You took your lucky break and broke it in two. Referring not only to the dissolution of the Beatles, but of his and John's relationship. Basically saying, you were lucky to have the Beatles. You were lucky to have me. It is a sarcastic, dismissive lyric, and a fine piece of music. Paul would later say, "Too Many People was really a message to John across the airwaves. I did feel like he was, preaching a little bit about what everyone should do, how they should live their lives, and I felt, at the time, that some of it was a bit hypocritical." The song set John off. And after hearing it, he began to read into each and every line from Paul's album, identifying slights that weren't even there. But now, it was his turn. John's response was the song How Do You Sleep? It's a brilliant track. The insults littered throughout are biting, even though, in reality, none of them have much merit. And insult was added to injury due to the fact that George Harrison, Ringo Starr, and even Alan Klein were present for portions of the writing and recording of the track. You live with straights who tell you you was king. This is basically in reference to the Eastmans, wealthy, upper-class businessmen who were advising Paul during the breakup. Jump when your mama tell you anything. I've seen this attributed as John calling Paul a mommy's boy, but Paul's mother died when he was young. What John is actually referring to is Paul's wife, Linda Eastman. This whole line is terribly ironic, considering John had a habit of referring to Yoko as his mother figure, and that John was far more under Yoko's sway than Paul under Linda's. The only thing you done was yesterday. According to a journalist present at the writing session, Alan Klein apparently suggested John follow up this line with, "You probably pinched that bugger anyway." Paul famously dreamed up the melody for Yesterday, and there has been quite a bit of digging done to see if he had subconsciously copied another piece of work. Nothing really substantial has been unearthed. A pretty face may last a year or two, but pretty soon they'll see what you can do. The sound you make is music to my ears. Paul was always known as the, quote, cute Beatle, the pretty Beatle. And John is saying that once he's old, the public won't give him as much praise, as the music he writes is vapid muzak, easy listening drivel. Paul, admittedly, did not receive good reviews for his early solo work. It has since been re-evaluated and praised for its influence, but at the time, this was the one insult John threw that seemed to hold any water. While John, George, Yoko, and Alan Klein all seemed to revel in the writing of the song, it was Ringo who would speak up against it. The journalist present, Felix Dennis, would write, "I remember Ringo getting more and more upset by this. I have a clear memory of his saying, 'That's enough, John.' Some of it was absolutely puerile. Thank God, a lot of it never actually got recorded because it was highly, highly personal. Like a bunch of schoolboys standing in the lavatory making scatological jokes." Musically, the song was critically praised, though a number of those critics found John's lyrics distasteful. Remember, publicly insulting a colleague like this was very unusual at the time. It was not some fun pot stirring. It was an affront. Ben Gerson of Rolling Stone wrote that the track was, quote, horrifying and indefensible, as a song that lay waste to Paul's character, family, and career. The motives for Sleep are baffling. Partly, it is the traditional bohemian contempt. Partly, it is the souring of John's long-standing competitive relationship with Paul. And Alan Smith, writing for NME, would say, musically, it's tremendous, open, big, powerful, thundering, dramatic. But this is a song which will be remembered for its lyrics. And he was absolutely right. In the years that followed, John and Paul had a tumultuous relationship. They'd reach a mild reconciliation, and then again throw some insults at each other. Never did they ever recover the friendship they once had. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, and if you would like to see more videos like this, consider subscribing. Down the line, I will be working on some long-form videos, more like what I do on my other channel, Making of the Beatles. So if you are interested in long-form videos, stay tuned in. I also have a Patreon, where for $1, you can watch videos early. Really, it's just a great way to support me and help me keep it up. Again, thank you. Until next time.